Thanks again, and welcome to the Project Censored 50th anniversary event here at Politics Prose. And again, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out. I also want to thank all the folks at the board, the Media Freedom Foundation that supported Project Censored for so long, all the wonderful Project Censored staff that work with us tirelessly, not just on the annual book and the top unreported stories every year, but we do so many more things these days. And I don't think you need to look around too much and too far, particularly given where we're located, where we are right now, to see that there are many things happening that really require the attention of a free press. And oftentimes the establishment and corporate media don't always do the best job at covering all the things that we need to know, and that's why we really support an independent free press, and we've been supporting independent media now going on 50 years. Summer of 2026 will be our 50th year, and so our book is just now out from the Censored Press, and we hope that you will check out a copy. Directly to my left is Harper, Freedom of the Press Foundation's first Daniel Ellsberg Chair on Government Secrecy, a position established in honor and continue the legacy of the whistleblower's fight for secrecy reform. Lauren joined Freedom Press Foundation after a decade fighting excessive government secrecy with Washington D.C. based nonprofit National Security Archive, and there she served as public policy director and helped historians, journalists, and the public with the declassification of historically significant government documents. She has a master's in public policy and a master's in Middle Eastern Studies, both from the University of Chicago. Next to Lauren, we have Joe Lauria, editor-in-chief of Consortium News, and a former UN correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Boston Globe, and other newspapers, including the Montreal Gazette, London Daily Mail, Star of Johannesburg. He was an investigative reporter for Sunday Times of London, a financial reporter for Bloomberg News. He began his professional work as a 19-year-old stringer for the New York Times. He's author of 2 books, A Political Odyssey with Senator Mike Gravel, with a foreword by Dan Ellsberg, and How I Lost by Hillary Clinton, foreword by Julian Assange. Again, it's an honor to have Joe here, and we've been big fans of Consortium News for such a long time, going back to great Bob Perry, and of course Dan Ellsberg was a friend of ours as well, contributing some amazing things to our books over the years on civil courage, which I'm sure you'll hear more about this evening. Next to Joe is John Kiriakou, a journalist and former C.I.A. counterterrorism officer, former senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and former counterterrorism consultant for AB News. He was responsible for the capture in Pakistan in 2002 of Abu Zubaydah, and then believed to be the third-ranking official in Al-Qaeda. In 2007, Kiriakou blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program, telling ABC News that the CIA tortured prisoners, that torture was official U.S. government policy, and that the policy had been approved by then-President George W. Bush. He became the 6th whistleblower indicted by the Obama administration under the Espionage Act, a law designed to punish spies, and served 23 months in prison as a result of the revelation. Kiriakou is the author of 8 books, including The Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life, and the CIA's War on Terror and Surveillance Detection, a CIA Insider's Guide, among others, and I have to say also share a hometown with John in Western Pennsylvania, so it's an honor to be here with John tonight. And in fact, none of the other folks in the CIA that were committing the crimes that John blew the whistle on served time, but he did. And so it's grateful that it's an honor to be here with John and appreciate his civil courage embodied quite literally. Next to John, we have Ryan Grimm, a longtime D.C. reporter breaking news from the halls of Congress and leading the Washington bureaus for The Intercept and HuffPost. At HuffPost, he led a team that was twice a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, won once. Grimm has spent years chronicling the rise of progressives in Congress, and his most recent book is The Squad, AOC, and the Hope of a Political Revolution, which followed his best-selling We've Got People. He's the author of the 2009 book, This Is Your Country on Drugs, and you might also say something about the amazing work that you do at Drug Site. So it's an honor to be here with you too, Ryan. Thanks for making it out. And also, several of the people up here this evening are also contributors to this year's book in the Media Democracy for Action chapter. And last but certainly not least is my wonderful colleague at Project Censored, Mischa, Geracoulis, who puts together our Media Democracy in Action chapter for the last several books. She's our Outreach and Engagement Officer at Project Censored and production lead on our organization's publishing imprint, The Censored Press. She's been a contributor to our yearbook series for a number of years. She's a project judge and author, most recently, of Media Framing and the Destruction of Cultural Heritage, by Rutledge. Her work focuses on human rights, journalistic ethics, and freedom of the press. And so you can imagine that just with that kind of an introduction, the folks here this evening have a lot to say. So I'm going to get started, and since it's a bookstore, I'm going to do something that I don't usually do, and that is read a very brief passage from our most recent book to kind of set the stage for things, and then I want to give a very brief history of what the project has been doing for the last 50 years. And I will say, unfortunately, while we've come to the conclusion that the project is arguably more needed today than when it was founded in the middle of the 1970s. And that's actually quite a mouthful. And I don't mean it hyperbolically, I unfortunately mean it quite frankly. So 50 years of covering the news that didn't make the news. Our country finds itself at a precipice. The United States teeters perilously due to rising economic inequality and domestic division on a host of issues, from foreign wars and immigration to civil rights and free expression, with an escalating crisis in confidence regarding the role of government, all resulting in cratering public trust in elected officials and institutions. We are perched at the verge of a possible nuclear apocalypse while our leaders avert their gaze from genocide. Fossil fuel pollution proliferates and an ensuing climate crisis rages, creating environmental devastation. The intelligence agencies and police apparatus have been exposed as the weaponized, militarized servants of the powerful who surveil and suppress we, the people. Even as we face numerous existential threats, government corruption and lack of trustworthy information sources are, or ought to be, paramount concerns. It would be reasonable to conclude that the preceding passage describes our present circumstances. However, this characterization of the United States could just as easily refer to the nation a half a century ago in the mid-1970s, just after its withdrawal from Vietnam, in the wake of the Watergate scandal that led to the resignation of a president when institutions were in crisis. The public had grown confused, restless, and agitated in the face of adversity. We went from a state of crisis to a state of civic malaise, and through it all, though Americans held on to slivers of hope, however ephemeral. For example, the press reporting on Nixon's scandals boosted the Fourth Estate's reputation, though that esteem has since flagged. Senate hearings on CIA and FBI corruption gave some pause to overreaching agencies and career civil servants, even if congressional inquiries stopped short of massive exposure and overhaul. And as an historian that does this kind of work with Project Censored and also with the Park Center at Ithaca College, that gives the Izzy Awards named after I.F. Stone every year, and I.F. Stone was actually an early supporter of Project Censored and Carl Jensen. I started the foreword of the book this year thinking about that by mostly thinking about how similar some of these things are and how these crises and challenges that we face today they might look different, but they're not entirely new. They do take on maybe different face, they have different facets. We could argue they're a little bit more ubiquitous and pernicious, and they are also in our faces. But again, if you go back and look at this history, this is the tumultuous history also that Project Censored was born from, right? And so Carl Jensen, who was a journalist early on, left journalism because he became very disenchanted with not being able to report important stories for the major news outlets of the time. And Carl then went into what he thought was a more honest career in public relations and advertising, because it meant he wasn't going to have to be a hypocrite anymore, right? He would at least wear the title. But after that stint, he actually went back into academia and he founded the communications department at Sonoma State University in Northern California, where he started thinking about the media again and became a media critic and was thinking about the Nixon administration, and he specifically was wondering in 1976, this is after Nixon resigns, this is after the Church Committee hearings, he said, how is it that the press didn't cover the Watergate scandal when it was happening before the 72 election? And some of the alternative press or independent press did, but we know Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein give credit to the Washington Post for really staying on that story. But it was a lot, and they did a lot late, and a lot of the other folks in the press, establishment press at the time, didn't want to put anybody on the case. They just kind of downplayed it as it wasn't that big of a deal. I could be talking about something now too, I guess, right? But this is him back in the day saying these things. And so Carl started formulating this question, and the question was, what if the independent press had gotten the story out to the public? What if the major media outlets actually really used the First Amendment protections they had to tell the public the things that they needed to know when they needed to know it in a timely fashion so that we could be more civically engaged? And would that change some of the outcomes? And Carl was a consummate optimist, and he thought it would make a difference. And he thought the media could make a difference. And so he came up with this idea that he called Project Censored, where he had students research independent news stories across the country, and he came up with the top 10 list every year. He went out and recruited journalists and academics and everybody from Howard Zinn to Noam Chomsky. Walter Cronkite was an early supporter. Hugh Downs was an early supporter. So it was a media criticism organization that was a media literacy organization. And that's one of the things that makes Project Censored unique to this day, is that we don't just report on the news that doesn't make the news and analyze why. We teach the next generation of intrepid muckraking journalists through critical media literacy education. And so I wanted to at least give you that little background in case some of you didn't realize or know the history of where the project came from, and why it may be no shock that the sociologist Peter Phillips took it over for quite a while, and then me as an academic historian have been the director since 2010. With our longtime associate director, Andy Lee Roth, now Shaylee Boydell is our associate director. We've been able to expand our team. We have a national radio program now for 15 years. We've done 3 documentaries. We have now the Censored Press, where we have multiple books now that are out. I have recently, as I mentioned, I'm now working at the Park Center for Independent Media, where Project Censored is working obviously very closely with these students in journalism and really trying to express to them the importance of independent muckraking journalism. And I have to say, even though I've only been there for 15 months, it's been an extraordinary place to be, and young people and the students there are extraordinary, and I'm saying that because we hear a lot about cynicism. We talked about malaise from 50 years ago, or malaise now. A lot of young people are really fired up and really excited and eager to do things, and I think that's really important, and I'm very privileged to have the position I do. So it's wonderful to be here with you this evening. Thank you for listening. I'd like to turn things over to my colleague Mischa Geracoulis, who's going to say a few words, and then we're going to hear from our panelists. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mickey. That was an excellent introduction, and I really appreciate that you ran down the history of the project and a little bit of history of journalism, something that we've discovered and we're learning and hearing from students more and more, that the history of journalism is not really taught in J schools. I came to Project Censored about 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago. I was an avid listener of the radio show, and I heard Mickey say on this one particular episode, oh, we're going to be hosting an academic conference. And it was local to where I was at the time, so I went, and I got there the first day, stayed to the very end, and my mind was blown, and I thought, I want to work with them. And so here we are, all these years later, and I, for the last few years, the last 4 actually, have had the pleasure, the privilege of curating and introducing a chapter in the annual State of the Free Press called Media Democracy in Action. And media democracy is something that, as Mickey was saying, is something that we absolutely need. It's journalism that is public service. It's journalism that is prioritizing truth, that is willing to ask hard questions, to challenge the official narratives, and to say what's what. Media democracy in action that is exemplified by the work that everyone here in the panel is doing is not going to talk about inverted facts or alternative facts. They're going to say what's what, and that's because they're in the business, I use the word business, not in a capitalistic way, but the work is in service to the public's best interest, not the best interest of power. And so this year, as with years prior, each person exemplifies the very finest of journalism. And I really am so lucky that I got to work with each person here. And even though John did not contribute to this chapter, John definitely had reviewed our manuscript and wrote a wonderful endorsement for the book. Ryan Grimm's work with Dropsite News was born out of the need to push back against the narrative that we're hearing, some of these inverted facts. Lauren Harper is hard at work, working to also push back against data that's being disappeared, history that's being rewritten. The work of Media Democracy in Action is restoring or maintaining the historical record. Joe Lauria, Consortium News for 30 years now, holding the feet to the fire of the powerful and not backing down, not capitulating. So it is my absolute pleasure, privilege to be with all of you. John Kiriakou certainly knows a thing or two about data and other things, persons being disappeared, and holding feet to fire, maintaining the historical record against all odds, challenge, I'm very privileged to be here with some courageous people. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ryan to talk about, your contribution.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's a real honor to be part of this because it really does represent the spirit of why we decided to launch Dropsite News. To your point, when Jeremy and I decided to leave The Intercept, the thing that we wanted to bring about, which we felt like just wasn't happening in the American media space, was giving a voice to people who are on the other side of the kind of American gun, or the American-funded Israeli gun sometimes, who then can actually get their pieces read. And so it's not as if Palestinians in Gaza had no way of getting their voices out. Like their ability to broadcast what was happening there was so powerful that it led to the destruction of TikTok and the sale of it to a new owner. It led to other Instagram, other social media companies like taking significant action to try to curtail and block them getting the word out about what was happening. And I always, whenever you see centers of power operating in that way, that's when you know it's effective. There used to be, I don't think I see it anymore, there used to be this bumper sticker, you might remember, that said, if voting actually mattered, they would make it illegal. And when they start to make things illegal, or buy them, or otherwise ban them, or censor them, or suppress them, that's your clue. Oh wait, that actually did matter. So that, oh wait, Instagram did matter, TikTok did matter. Like this, because that's why they're trying to make it illegal. That's why they're trying to censor it and suppress it. Like for instance, they're now saying, for centuries, there's been a rule in the House of Representatives called the discharge petition, that if you get 218 signatures on a petition, you can overcome the objections of the leadership of the House, and you can vote on this petition. And everybody used to say, well, that's not real because there's all these hiccups, and you'll never actually be able to do it. It has to be the third legislative Monday after the first Friday. It's too complicated, it'll never happen. And then they did it. And now the House is saying they're gonna get rid of it, which shows that they're gonna change the rules again. They're not gonna get rid of it because that'd be a little bit much, be a little aggressive, but they're gonna change the rules substantially. So it can't work anymore. So that's how you know that they actually were and are very effective at getting the word out. But what they didn't have is a presence in media that was being what we would call kind of mainstream media. And so what Jeremy and I had, because of our 20 plus years that we've been doing this, was at least some grudging credibility from the rest of the press. And so we figured if we could take that credibility and turn it as a spotlight onto these other voices, then they would have to at least confront them. They'd have to at least be heard. And what ended up happening, and to back up on that point, Gaza in particular, but Palestine in general, is probably the highest educated population in the world. And you can imagine, like in prisons, you can lift weights, you can go to the yard, you can read books. And in Gaza, with a 50+% unemployment rate in the best of times, the thing that people could do is get another graduate degree, get another graduate degree, get a PhD. And so you wound up having, by population length, literally the most educated population on the planet. And so when Israel announced they weren't going to allow Western journalists into Gaza, a lot of the mainstream news outlets rightly protested. This is outrageous. It should be let in. We protested too. All journalists should be allowed in. Like that's a basic, fundamental right. But then they kind of stopped there. So wait a minute, there are thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza who are capable of doing journalism. And a lot of them were doing it in a citizen capacity, like we just talked about. But a lot of others had, serious journalistic skills and just needed a little bit of mentoring. Some of them needed translating because a lot of them didn't speak English. So we hired Shrika Abdul-Qudus, a tremendous journalist who had been at Democracy Now! For years and was also the chief investigative correspondent on The Night Won't End, which is an absolutely incredible documentary if you haven't seen that about his job and others in Gaza. And so what he would do is they would file in Arabic, he translated it into English, and then we would send it out to our audience. And because people knew who we were, like, okay, we'll read this. And they would read it like, wait, this is news. This is journalism. Like this is how this is supposed to be done. These are the facts that are happening on the ground. It's objective, it's straightforward. These are, we've gone to the Israeli military for comment, we've asked them for their response on this. We've gone to the Ministry of Health, we have eyewitness reports, we have videos, this is what happened. And it's a staggering indictment on the rest of the media that on a shoestring, that's possible. And it's possible all over the world. Now we're seeing, I'll wrap up really quickly. Now we're seeing like a kind of inverse version of it here in the United States where the entire press is fixated on, rightfully fixated, I think, in a lot of ways, on the story of Jeffrey Epstein. And most of what is being written about based on correspondence that is public. This is not something that we have access to, but nobody else does. It's much similar to, say, WikiLeaks in 2016. The press, if you remember the feeding frenzy in 2016, when WikiLeaks published all of the DNC emails and also Podesta, right? Story after story after story. There were media understood. They didn't know exactly where the emails came from, but they were newsworthy, and they figured out how to go through the inboxes, make some phone calls, make some connections, and write articles about it. All of a sudden, they have forgotten how to do that basic kind of journalism. And yet the work is still breaking through, which is the most gratifying part. Like they can take down a TikTok, they can take over TikTok, they can even not cover it, yet people are still connected, people are still able to share news, and people still want the truth. And so, despite all that, it still gets out. There is a dystopian future which they completely own everything, lock it down to, like we'll see, like maybe we're underestimating the capacity at censorship. But so far, they are failing. It is costing them, I don't know what the exact numbers would be, but the truth is much cheaper than a lie. And so it costs much more to try to suppress news and try to spread something that's fake. Then I think some oligarchs are willing to pay. There's this is really funny anecdote between Larry and David Ellison, where David Ellison's wanted to go out and add to, so Larry Ellison has bought TikTok, David Ellison, Warner Brothers, he wanted to go out and get Warner Brothers and CNN, and his dad, because clearly it's an ideological question, his dad, who's also an ideologue, was like, hold on a second. You don't even play with these toys. And now you want all these new toys? And there was some reporting that Larry Ellison was getting skeptical that there was a profit play here. That maybe actually, do we really want to put all our chips in this completely collapsing industry? And of course, if it's just a profit play, no, you don't. You're going to lose the house on that. Like CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, like every dollar you spend on that, you're going to get 3 cents back. Just pure profit. Now, power and ideology, that's a different question. And so we'll see how much these oligarchs end up being willing to lose in order to just get a complete lockdown and control of it, because it's so expensive because the truth is so free. Because people will share that willingly. You have to pay so much to get people to lie and to stop the truth moving around.
Lauren, you really
Sure, happy to. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It really is an honor to be on this panel. So for those of you who are not familiar with me and the work that I do at Freedom of the Press Foundation, my job as the Daniel Ellsberg Chair on Government Secrecy is basically to communicate the ways in which the government keeps too many secrets and to fight against those methods. So how does that happen? For me, that looks like doing a lot of advocacy events like this one, a lot of writing, filing a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests or FOIA requests, an increasing amount of litigation, and communicating with members of Congress when they are interested in tackling these issues. And I have a feeling that tonight a lot of the questions that y'all will have will probably be centered around the current environment that we are in right now under the Trump administration, which certainly makes sense. But Mickey had an excellent point, which is that a lot of the things that we're seeing right now, especially in terms of the ways in which the government keeps secrets, none of that is new. Most of that is not new. A lot of the things that the Trump administration is doing are taking advantage of pre-existing loopholes. There has never been a Republican or Democratic administration that has not tried to keep too many secrets. There has never been a CIA director, an FBI director, a you name it, who has not fought to keep information from the public because that information either revealed wrongdoing or could embarrass the government. That said, I do think we are in a uniquely dangerous environment right now in terms of access to reliable government information. And my overarching concern going forward is that the censorship of government information, particularly reliable information, will prevent us from fully participating in the democratic process, because it is very difficult to vote and to litigate and to hold the government accountable when you don't know what it's doing. And that's not just true for us sitting here, that's also true for members of Congress, who are often given the same runaround by agencies when trying to access agency information as we are. So, how is the government most likely to try and withhold information from the public? It's really happening in 3 ways right now. The first is making FOIA worse. Now, if anybody in here has ever filed a FOIA request, we can all tell you FOIA has never worked the way that it should. And for those who don't know, FOIA is the federal transparency law that allows any one of you to ask the government to release information. It is the one tool that the public has to dictate what government information is released. So FOIA has never worked the way that it should be. It's never lived up to its promise. There have been growing backlogs. There's always been a level of partisan involvement in the FOIA release process. But things have really escalated under the Trump administration. I think the most obvious example is the wholesale firing of entire FOIA offices. We've seen this happen across the Health and Human Services Department. I also had a FOIA release earlier this year. I requested a document from the Director of National Intelligence's office. It was an intelligence community memo that was released to me that basically showed that the Trump administration was lying about its rationale for invoking the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans to El Salvador. A couple weeks later, Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, fired the FOIA official who made that lawful release to me. And there is no way to interpret that other than this having a chilling effect on the freedom of information processing across the government. Another thing that we are seeing right now in terms of censoring government information has to do with agencies not fully complying with something called the Federal Records Act. Now, this is the federal law that requires agencies to, number one, create information that documents government activity. It also prevents the federal government from deleting or destroying government records before the end of its retention schedule. Now, the Federal Records Act has never been administered 100%. There have always been agencies that have deleted or destroyed their records before they were supposed to, whether that was a mistake or intentional. But we are seeing more incidents of that destruction now by high-level officials, whether they are using Signal, which prevents the preservation of records, or whether it's seeing administrators at USAID telling their agents it's okay to destroy classified information. But the biggest systemic problem, I would argue, on the Federal Records Act front was the firing of Dr. Colleen Shogan, who's the Archivist of the United States, at the beginning of the Trump administration, and the replacement of her with acting archivist and a million other things, Marco Rubio, who has demonstrated absolutely no interest in enforcing the Federal Records Act across the government. Marco Rubio, wearing one of his other hats, famously was a participant in the Signal chat, Signalgate, where it was very obvious on that chat that those records were about to be destroyed. We're going to self-destruct in something like a week or a month, I forget which. And he did not say, hey, these are permanent records. This is a National Security Council meeting in effect. That ought not be happening. Another systemic problem that I am working on and worried about is the failure to enforce the Presidential Records Act. Now, I'm sure a lot of you remember that at the end of the first Trump administration, President Trump stole public property when he took presidential records that belonged to the public and took them to Mar-a-Lago. Now, the Presidential Records Act, one of its key failings is that it's always been something of a gentleman's agreement with lack of enforcement. No one under the Biden administration or Congress at that time tried to fix those loopholes. And now we are in a situation where President Trump, I am sure, at the end of this term, will not feel restrained and will feel free to take his presidential records with him when he leaves office. Importantly, this is not just about President Trump. This is about all entities within the White House that are Presidential Record Act entities, and this includes the National Security Council and DOJ. All of this is happening. All of this that is preventing access to reliable government information is happening at the same time that the administration is waging war on whistleblowers, firing inspectors general, and bullying and intimidating members of the press, particularly national security and immigration reporters, particularly foreign reporters, from speaking truth to power. And at the same time, we are seeing media conglomerates, which have interests outside of their media business, capitulate to the Trump administration. All of this puts us in a really difficult spot. But I want to end on a positive note, which is that I think there is reason for optimism. Earlier, a couple days ago, we all saw the Epstein transparency bill pass. Now, I'm skeptical, this is my own personal belief, that we will see a lot of new information come of that bill. But it does show that transparency is popular. And with enough continued pressure, Congress can support it, and we can all work to do what we can to be sand in the gears.
Can't have that, can't have transparency. Put an end to that fast. What a dangerous idea. Thank you, Mickey, very much, and Mischa, for inviting me here tonight. And congratulations on the 50th anniversary of Project Censored. 5 decades of fighting censorship. I'm from New York City. I talk fast naturally, but I'm going to have to even speed it up more to get this in. Now, we celebrated our own anniversary just on Saturday, the 30th anniversary. We believe we're the oldest, and somebody prove us wrong, online independent publication in the United States. It was founded and continues with the role of combating suppressed news. It was launched on November 15, 1995, and appeared 6 days before Salon.com went online, about a month, 2 months before the New York Times, about 3 or 4 months for the LA. It was in that era, late 95, early 96, where everybody went online, and conservative news beat all of them, whatever that's worth. Now, it was founded by Robert Parry. He was an Associated Press investigative reporter, a real investigative reporter. He spent months on the story in the days when news organizations actually spent that kind of money. Thought that was an important thing. Remember that? And Mickey, Well, he broke the story about Oliver North's role in the Iran-Contra scandal. But the AP tried to suppress it. They kept saying, go back and get more. He said, I have 20 sources. I don't care. Get Oliver North to confess. He said, that's impossible. We have it. So what happened while this was happening, they were suppressing his story, the Spanish AP somehow got a hold of it and put it out. So all of Latin America read the story. It was too late. AP English had to put it out. That's how we know about Oliver North's role in the Iran-Contra scandal. Bob went to Newsweek magazine after that, fed up with the AP, and the same thing happened. They had suppressed stories. They said, it was for the good of the country that we couldn't publish this, Bob. Don't you get it? Maybe for the good of certain powerful people in the country, but not the country as a whole. So he quit that as well, and he realized he could not stay inside the mainstream media anymore, and he started this thing that he knew nothing about in 1995. The fledgling World Wide Web, he started Consortium News in 1995. And we have, he put together a consortium of journalists whose stories were otherwise suppressed. That's hence the name Consortium News. And today we still have people who are in the inside. They were mainstream insiders who turned dissident, and they had stories to tell. And I'm just going to name a few of the people, like John Kiriakou, right? He was one of our regular columnists. Ray McGovern, former C.I.A. analyst. Scott Ritter, former Marine counterintelligence UN weapons inspector who opposed the invasion of Iraq at the time. On our board sat the late Dan Ellsberg, Mike Gravel, Senator Mike Gravel, John Pilger, and now Chris Hedges and British diplomat Craig Murray. These are all people who were had inside knowledge of institutions like the CIA or big mainstream media organizations. One of our columnists, Patrick Lawrence, was former Asia editor of the International Herald Tribune, and as Mick talked about, my background in mainstream media as well. And over the years, CNN's biggest stories were, we were among the first or the few to oppose the U.S. invasion, the war of aggression against Iraq. And I was working for, at that time, a Canadian chain called Southern News, and they published a Montreal Gazette, a Citizen, all that. And they did not like my reporting because I was at the UN Security Council highlighting the Germans and the French going against the U.S., one of the few times European powers have opposed the United States in the post-war world, to oppose this invasion. And on the day of the invasion, I was fired by Ottawa because of my reporting. They didn't like that. So it turned out that I got a story at the Wall Street Journal suppressed. I was writing about Palestine becoming an observer state at the General Assembly, and they kept cutting out that 140 countries already recognize Palestine around the world. They were certainly going to get voted on as an observer state. They kept cutting that out. So I went to Robert Parry and said, Bob, will you publish this article? And he did. That's how I became part of the consortium back in 2011. Some of the other stories, Bob was the first really, and Aaron Mate has given him credit for this, to debunk, and I know some people still believe in this story, the Russiagate story, which he exposed as Democratic opposition research dressed up as serious intelligence that led to the interference in domestic politics by U.S. intelligence agencies. Who gives a damn it was Donald Trump? That's a serious thing. That's a serious thing, and partisanship should not have come into that story, but as we damn well know it was. And of course, what do you get? He was one of the first to write extensively about the fact what happened in Maidan at that day in 2014 was a coup d'etat against an elected government that the OSCE had certified the election of Viktor Yanukovych, and the role of neo-Nazis. It was all out in the mainstream at the time. He kept plugging away at that. And our coverage of Julian Assange won us a Julian Assange Award. And what did you get for all this? Well, you're called a Saddam apologist for opposing the invasion. You're a Putin puppet for talking about what happened in 2014 when the war really first began, not in 2022, and et cetera, et cetera. This is the thanks you get. These are, or now we're Hamas sympathizers, of course, because of what we write about what's going on in Israel. We're not the only ones. And finally, that's people are waking up to what's going on there, what has been going on there. People who can't argue facts can only spew invectives. So Bob and CN Consortium News blazed a trail in online independent journalism that today we're witnessing an explosion on social media and independent media of incredibly new voices, an enormous amount of new voices. And what's happening? The mainstream media and the state are freaking out. Their power is being seriously challenged by people. Their arrogance is no longer a protection like it always was. And I worked inside again, so I know a little bit about that. The best of independent media provides perspectives that are outside the parameters of American mental conditioning. That the mainstream media reinforces these delusions every damn day. So it's very hard to break through. The response, again, of the state and corporate media is to go against and to shut down speech, what I want to say, to try to shut down speech of those who are challenging them. That's the only way they know how to respond. It's a fortress mentality. They're circling the wagons. They're going to go after anybody who's calling out what's really happening. What they have so successfully, as Mick said, going back 50 years or more, and as Lauren also said, there's nothing new about this. But I have to say something about the C word, censorship. I think it's overused sometimes. I'll tell you that if an editor gets a story that's poorly written, that doesn't belong in the publication, and sends it back to the writer and says, thank you very much, that is not censorship, I'm sorry, even though a lot of aggrieved and hurt writers think that it is. It's an editorial judgment. If you could prove that I know that the facts are true, but for political reasons I'm not going to publish it, that's where you're getting into suppression of news. That's what happened to Bob Perry at AP that I'm saying. And that is what's going on today in great numbers. Look at what's happening in Britain with the Terrorism Act. Richard Medhurst, Craig Murray on our board, they've been detained at Heathrow Airport, questioned. Medhurst 24 hours detained. Why? For what they've reported, what they've said, what they've written about Israel. It's just extraordinary how students are being arrested and deported from this country for what they've said about Israel. And now they're talking about taking away, perhaps, this is what we really fear, nonprofit status of nonprofit news organizations. It's a very serious matter. And, with us, PayPal canceled our subscription because they didn't like our Ukraine coverage. The Canadian intelligence agency gave Global News, a big network in Canada, some documents that said Consortium News was in the forefront of a Russian campaign in Canada to malign Canadian politicians. Not a stitch of evidence. Absolute rubbish. We tried to sue them. Our lawyer went to the wrong court. He went to Alexandria instead of Washington, where they have an office. Thrown out. The Grey Zone reported leaked emails that showed a British Foreign Office official wanted to look into my reporting, and also I landed up on this ridiculous Hamilton dashboard. You might remember that. My name is on that. So we also believe that NewsGuard was teamed up with the Pentagon to abridge our First Amendment rights, to suppress our reporting specifically on the coup and the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and I think just to keep it covert, just the way the agencies would like. Now, we tried to sue them. We did sue them to prove this, but a federal judge in New York threw it out, reducing us to just contrarians. So we were never able to get a hold through discovery of the contract that NewsGuard had with the Pentagon, or to prove that they had malice against us, because they had to know there was a coup, and they had to know there were neo-Nazis, because the New York Times or anybody else published it at the time, and yet they accused us of publishing false information. Now, a word as I finish about Project Censored. I looked it up today in the New York Times, and I saw one reference in 50 years, and it came last year when they interviewed Mischa. So maybe Project Censored is being censored in a way. And hats off to them for calling out the suppression to protect powerful interests that is now reaching critical proportions. Thank you very much.
John? I'll keep it quick because we're closing. When I was 9 years old, I told my parents that I wanted to be a spy when I grew up. And they bought me walkie-talkies. Yeah, they bought me walkie-talkies and thought that a 9-year-old would change his mind. When I was 16, I told them I wanted to be a spy in the Middle East. And so I went to school and got a degree in Middle Eastern Studies and got a master's degree in legislative affairs and joined the C.I.A. and became a spy in the Middle East. And life was supposed to be great, right? I went to school, I got a degree, I got another degree, I got my dream job at the CIA, and I was going to work 30 years and live happily ever after. And then I got to realize, once I got into a position where I could see the sausage being made, that everything that they were telling us was a lie. Everything. There's no such thing as a torture program. Of course there is. I've watched you torture people. There's no such thing as an international rendition program. Yeah, there is. You have an entire private airline that kidnaps people and takes them to other countries. Lie after lie after lie. I resigned from the CIA. After objecting to the torture program, nobody paid any attention to me. Actually, I was called a malcontent who had these were the exact words from my promotion panel. I had exhibited a shocking lack of commitment to counterterrorism. I had been the chief of counterterrorism in Pakistan, but because I wouldn't torture anybody, my lack of commitment was shocking to them. So I blew the whistle on the torture program, went to prison for it for 2 years, would do it again today if I had the opportunity. But no. But then I got to meet people like Joe Lauria. Human rights were always important to me. Human rights became the overriding concern in my life after I left the CIA. And not just the human rights of people, most of whom were innocent, whom the CIA was capturing and sending to dungeons all around the world. But human rights in the American prison system. I saw horrible things in the prison system. You know, people ask me all the time, were you afraid in prison? Yeah, of the guards, not of the other prisoners. Because it was the guards who were the monsters, not the other prisoners. It was the guards who put people in solitary confinement for as long as 44 years. There's a prisoner at Angola Penitentiary in Louisiana who has been in solitary confinement without human contact for 44 years. The United Nations says that any solitary confinement, any lack of human contact over 15 days is a form of torture. The United States is one of only about a dozen countries on the planet that doesn't recognize that. But you don't read about that in the Washington Post, or the New York Times, or the Wall Street Journal, or see it on CNN, or Fox, or MSNBC. You can only see it in places like Consortium News. You see it in places like The Intercept, or Drop Site News. I've gotten to the point now where I only read alternative media. I will admit that I do the New York Times crossword puzzle every day, because my doctor told me it would keep my brain fresh as I enter my 60s. But I only get my news from alternative sources. And in most of these cases, I know the journalists who are producing the news, who are producing these investigations, and I know that I can trust them. I can't trust CNN, or MSNBC, or Fox, or any of these other mainstream phonies that are more involved in entertainment than in news. And so, we have to think about ourselves. We have to think about those around us. We have to promote independent news among our friends and our family members, because we want them to be as well informed as we are. We want them to be able to see what's going on in the world, because we know definitively now that the mainstream media aren't going to tell us. Which leaves 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of our panelists, and just have a quick concluding remark to bring it back to the importance of independent media rather than corporate media, which seems to have all the resources. In a Project Censored for a long time, we stopped saying the word mainstream because there's nothing mainstream about 6 corporations that control 90% of what you get to hear and read and see, and now 5 major tech companies. So we do try to call it corporate media, establishment media, legacy press. There's other nastier names, but we won't put those out there now. But also, we don't say those things to denigrate it, but more accurately describe it. And what's independent doesn't mean objective. There's no such thing as objectivity. And that's what the corporate media hide behind. They hide behind the fact that they get to decide what's actually happening in the world. And that's just not true. And for 50 years, Project Censored has lionized the independent press. Right? As the media critics of the corporate media, we also support an independent press. And Carl Jensen, our founder, this is a fantastic quote that I often leave things with, because I think it's really hopeful, and it's why I keep doing what I'm doing, teaching young people about the importance of independent media. Carl wrote, and he wrote this in 1995, right? Since we will all benefit from a more responsible media, we all really should help bring it about. To do this, the corporate media owners should start to earn their unique First Amendment privileges. Editors should rethink their news judgment. Journalists should persevere in going after hard stories. Journalism professors should emphasize ethics and critical analysis and turn out more muckrakers and fewer buckrakers. The judicial system should defend the freedom of the press provision of the First Amendment with far more vigor, and the public should show the media it is more concerned with the high crimes and misdemeanors of its political and corporate leaders than it is with the crimes and gossip of celebrities. The effort will be well worth it, and I couldn't agree with Carl more, and again, it's an honor to be here with you all and to be celebrating 50 years of Project Censored, so thanks you all for being here this evening. We have a few minutes left for a question or two, and we have some free materials over here past Mischa, stickers, Ralph Nader's Capitol Hill Citizen from Washington D.C. right here in town, where you can only get hard copies of it. It's specifically for Jeff Bezos and the people of the Washington Post to find out the things they're missing. We have some other stickers and things, and we'd love to talk to you, as well as the store, of course, has books to sell. If we could have one or two folks that want to say a few things really quickly, I want to make sure that we get to hear from you, and then we'll have to wrap up. And I also want to give a shout out to one of our students, Jaden Lawrence, who's here, so I want to have him say something with us as well. Go ahead, please.
Hi, this is for Lauren. There are reports that, DOJ copied all of the Social Security Administration information, which is pretty much all American. Do you think that's true? And what do you think they're doing with it? And is there anything we can do about that?
Good question. So what I am concerned about with DOJ is that it has accessed data sets and records from a number of different agencies, and that it has potentially signed memorandums of understanding with those agencies to make those federal agency records, presidential records, and entirely the purview of DOJ. To what end are they going to use that? One seems clear. It seems a lot of this data is going to be used for immigration enforcement. Beyond that, I'm not entirely sure, but I do think when we think about data and the way the government accesses it, I think when we talk about things like DHS, the most accurate way to explain it is a domestic spy agency. I think that is effectively what it has become, and to a large extent, I do believe that DOJ's work is informing that.
We have one of our students is actually in town. He studied with one of our longtime contributor professors, Steve Masick at North Central College. Jaden, again, I want to emphasize how significant it is as part of what we do at Project Censored. We like to practice what we teach, and that's why we really like working with young people and students that are really interested in media literacy and the news, and they really want to make a difference, and they realize how powerful independent media can be. Jaden did a lot of research on the first couple chapters of our book this year, so if you wanted to say a word or two, we'd be happy to hear it.
Thank you for the platform.
Yeah.
I actually want to ask a question.
Sure, please do.
What's the role of partisan independent journalists who use multimedia platforms now? Is that a solution? Can that be possible? I'm including podcasters or people who go in and just do interviews and do the work on their own.
It's part of the new media space, right? There's a lot of issues and challenges and problems with social media that we don't have time to get into here. But having more independent voices, even if they're voices that we know have a perspective to offer, the more significant thing is wondering if someone has a bias. It's your awareness of, do you know what their bias is, right? And then do they still speak with facts, and do they source them, right? And then the job of us out here in the rest of the country is to find other people and find other perspectives. And that's exactly what the corporate media doesn't want us to do. They want us to think that they have a lock on the perspectives, and that no matter how many other experts or how many other facts or how many other things that independent media will point out, they want to suppress it. And this is why they're going after nonprofits. This is why because a lot of the independent media outlets are nonprofits. There's a lot of ways that they're trying to shut down any alternative voices. And so I would always say, I don't get to quote Ronald Reagan very often, if ever, but I did fly into that airport that I'm supposed to call something else. DCA, that's the one.
National effort.
Trust but verify.
Yes.
Right? So we have to question everything, right? And we build relationships with sources, and sort of no source is perfect, and people make mistakes. But what we want to keep a sharp eye out for are disingenuous people and bad faith actors that are more bent on getting you to agree with them no matter what the truth is. right? And so there's a lot of folks that are influencers, that's the popular word, right? Maybe more honest word for propagandists, right? That are trying to tell people things that aren't in the establishment press. But then there are others that are maybe speaking beyond the facts, and they're really trying to push agendas. And that's why we need to be critically media literate. We need to be able to ask the right questions, understand those things. And that's why at Project Censored, we don't just tell people, oh, go to that source, go to that source. We teach people and scaffold the way to ask questions and to really be involved in the process of gathering news and even being the media yourself in the example that you're saying, but to do so according to the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, which is really important, and it's what's really woefully lacking in a lot of the establishment media. And I really wish, again, that everybody would have to take a journalism course. Everybody should have to take a media literacy kind of a course, and it should be part of our normal education growing up from the time that we're in elementary school. And the United States is one of the countries around the world that don't do that, doesn't have that, and there's only a handful of states that actually mandate media literacy education in K-12, which we've written a couple of books about ourselves, because we realize that that's part of the challenge, right? Is if you don't teach people to think critically about media when they're young, and you're giving them these phones and all these tablets and screens and devices when they're young, they're already down the path, and you have to sort of go and snatch them back if you can catch them. Right? And so I see a lot of hope and promise in some ways in these new platforms, but they're also being bought up and shut down or algorithmically corralled. And so, right, we always have to keep up with whatever the new forms of censorship by proxy happen to be. Thanks so much for your question, Jane. I think we have one time for one more, and then we have to wrap up, I believe, I'm afraid. Or no.
I wanted to call out Trump for saying he would maybe revoke ABC's license because he didn't like a question of a reporter. I mean, this is how low we've sunk here. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, the weaponization of the SEC is very unfortunate, and the fact that these things are happening out in the open and very brazenly is very concerning. Because even past presidents that had bad relationships with the press, Richard Nixon, and Project Censored comes to mind, right? William Safire dropping those words into Spiro Agnew's mouth and nattering nabobs of negativism, that alliteration. Right? Sapphire was good, but as far as words go. I think that what's happened now is just the mask is just really ripped off. And we seem to have degraded, our discourse is degraded, our news media don't model discourse, they don't model disagreement. I co-authored another book called Let's Agree to Disagree, about how to argue with people that you disagree with and try to build bridges, not walls. This doesn't mean make yourself a doormat or subject yourself to abuse, but it means there are ways that we can have constructive dialogue and we can try to understand each other and work across divides. And we've done it in the past, and I think we can do it again. We just need to decide that we're tired of whatever this dark carnival is. By the way, that's the cover of our book this year, The Art of Anson Stevens Bolin. And I think we need to get outside of that tent and see the sunlight again. So thanks so much to everybody for coming this evening. Happy to talk to you all until our wonderful hosts take us out of their house. But I'd love to see you all if you want to get a few books. I'd be happy to sign them, and we're happy to talk to you as long as they'll allow us to be here. And thanks again for caring about a very free and independent press and for supporting First Amendment issues. Thanks.